I was 16 years old when this happened, and at the time, I didn't think of our house as unsafe. We lived in a small duplex on the edge of town, the kind of place that sat just far enough away from everything else that it felt isolated at night. During the day, it looked normal. Almost boring. A short driveway, a small patch of grass out front, and a single porch light that buzzed quietly when it was turned on. At night, though, the neighborhood changed. After around 10 o'clock, most of the houses went dark. A lot of the people on our street were either elderly or worked overnight shifts at the nearby factory, so there were long stretches of time where no one was outside. No cars, no footsteps, no voices, just the hum of distant traffic and the occasional dog barking several streets away. It was just my mom and me living there. My dad had moved out years earlier, and by the time I was 16, we had settled into a predictable routine. Dinner around 7, TV until 10 or 11. Lock the doors, turn off the lights, go to bed. I never questioned that routine. That night started no differently than any other. I stayed up later than usual, watching videos on my phone until my eyes started to hurt. I remember checking the time before I fell asleep. It was a little after 1 in the morning. The house was completely quiet. When I woke up, I didn't know what had pulled me out of sleep. There was no loud noise, no crash or bang. It was more like my body reacted before my brain did, the way it sometimes does when something isn't right. I lay there for a few seconds, staring at the dark ceiling, listening. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Then I heard it again. It was a soft sound, almost delicate, a faint metallic click followed by a slow, creaking noise. So quiet that if I hadn't already been awake, I probably wouldn't have noticed it at all. My first thought was our cat, but almost immediately after that, I remembered that we had put him outside before going to bed. My mom liked letting him roam at night, and I distinctly remembered watching him slip through the back door. The sound came again. This time, I recognized it. Someone was touching the front door. Not knocking, not banging, touching it. I sat up in bed, my heart starting to beat faster. I strained my ears, trying to figure out if the sound was actually coming from inside the house, or if it was something outside that just happened to line up perfectly with my fear. Then I heard the door handle move. Slowly, carefully. The sound was unmistakable. I got out of bed and walked to my bedroom door. I didn't turn on the light. I don't know why, but something in my head told me that light would make me visible somehow, even though that didn't make any sense. I cracked the door open just enough to look into the hallway. The hallway light was off, but there was a faint glow coming from the kitchen window at the far end. Moonlight reflected off the tile floor, just bright enough for me to see shapes and shadows. That's when I heard it clearly. The front door handle was moving again, back and forth, slow and deliberate. Whoever was outside wasn't trying to force the door. They weren't rattling it or shaking it aggressively. They were testing it, the way someone does when they're checking if a door has been left unlocked. I stood there frozen, gripping the edge of my bedroom door so tightly my fingers started to hurt. I remember thinking that maybe it was someone at the wrong house, a drunk neighbor, someone confused. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. The movement stopped. For a brief moment, I felt a wave of relief. I thought maybe whoever had realized the door was locked and left. Then I heard footsteps. They weren't heavy. They weren't rushed. They were slow, measured steps moving across the porch. The sound shifted, traveling along the side of the house, toward the kitchen. My stomach dropped. We had a second door in the kitchen that led outside. My mom sometimes forgot to lock it before bed, especially if she was tired. I backed away from the hallway and retreated into my room, closing the door as quietly as I could. I locked it, even though I knew that if someone really wanted to get in, that lock wouldn't stop them for long. My hand was shaking so badly that I dropped my phone when I tried to pick it up. I called my mom. She didn't answer. The phone rang and rang, each second feeling longer than the last. While I waited, I heard the kitchen door handle move. Same slow motion, same careful testing. Whoever it was knew exactly how to stay quiet. When my mom finally answered, I whispered as fast as I could, telling her that someone was outside trying to get into the house. I could hear the panic in her voice immediately. She told me to stay in my room and lock the door. She said she was calling the police. After I hung up, I sat on my bed in complete silence, staring at the door. For the next couple of minutes, I could hear movement outside the house. Footsteps pacing back and forth. The faint sound of fabric brushing against the siding. The occasional click of a handle or the scrape of something metallic against glass. It felt like whoever it was taking their time, like they weren't in a hurry. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. No footsteps, no movement, just silence. The police arrived a few minutes later. By then, my mom was awake and standing in the hallway, holding her phone like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. The officers searched around the house, but didn't find anyone. What they did find were muddy footprints leading away from our porch and fingerprints on the kitchen door handle. One of the officers told us something that stuck with me. He said that whoever it was wasn't trying to break in. They were checking to see which doors were unlocked, checking to see if anyone noticed, checking to see who made it easy. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. We moved out a few months later. Even now, years later, I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, listening for the sound of a door handle moving in the dark. This happened a few years later when I was in college and living alone for the first time. My apartment wasn't anything special. It was a small one-bedroom unit on the second floor of an older building just off campus. The building had been there long before I was born, and it showed. The carpets were worn thin in the hallways, the paint on the walls had yellowed slightly, and every door closed with a dull, hollow sound that made the place feel emptier than it actually was. Still, I felt safe there. Living alone felt like a milestone. I could come and go as I pleased, stay up late, sleep in, and not worry about anyone else's schedule. To make myself feel more secure, I developed routines. I always locked the door behind me. I always checked the windows. I always made sure the deadbolt clicked before I walked away. That routine mattered to me. It made living alone feel controlled, predictable. If I followed the steps, nothing bad would happen. That night, I came home later than usual. I had stayed on campus studying with friends, and by the time I parked my car, the lot was almost empty. Most of the lights in the surrounding buildings were off, and the air had that cold, still feeling that only seems to exist late at night. Inside the apartment building, the hallway lights buzzed softly, flickering every few seconds. I remember thinking I should mention it to the landlord, even though I knew I probably wouldn't. When I unlocked my apartment door and stepped inside, nothing immediately felt wrong. The air smelled the same. The lights were off, just like I had left them. My couch, my desk, my shoes by the door, everything looked exactly the way it was supposed to. I locked the door behind me and leaned my backpack against the wall, listening to the familiar click of the deadbolt sliding into place. I remember thinking how quiet it was. Too quiet. Usually, I could hear someone else moving in the building. A door opening, a TV through the wall, footsteps above me. That night, there was nothing. I walked into the kitchen to get a glass of water. As I reached into the cabinet for a cup, something caught my eye. The cabinet under the sink was open. Not wide open, just enough that the door was angled outward, casting a thin shadow across the floor. I stood there staring at it longer than I probably should have. My first instinct was to rationalize it. I told myself I must have left it that way earlier. Maybe I had grabbed cleaning supplies. Maybe I was tired and misremembering. But the longer I stared at it, the more certain I became that it hadn't been open when I left. A small sense of unease crept in, the kind you feel when something doesn't quite line up, but you don't yet know why. I straightened up, suddenly very aware of how alone I was. That's when I heard it, breathing. At first, it was so faint that I thought it was my own. I stopped breathing altogether, listening. The sound continued, slow, controlled. It was coming from the hallway that led to my bedroom. Every part of my body went cold. I didn't turn around. I didn't move. I just stood there holding the cup in my hand, staring at the cabinet, listening to someone breathe inside my apartment. My thoughts raced, but my body felt frozen. I remember wondering if they knew I was standing there, if they were watching me, waiting to see what I would do. The breathing stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything I had experienced before. It was the kind of silence that made my ears ring. Then I heard footsteps, soft, careful steps moving away from me down the hallway, toward my bedroom. That was when reality finally hit me. Someone had been inside my apartment the entire time. My hand started shaking so badly that the cup slipped from my fingers and shattered on the floor. The sound echoed through the apartment, impossibly loud, and for a split second, I was terrified it would trigger something. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I turned and ran. I yanked the door open and sprinted down the hallway barefoot, screaming for help. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. I don't remember pressing the elevator button or getting outside. I only remember the cold night air hitting my face and realizing I was shaking from head to toe. A neighbor heard me and called the police. When they arrived, I couldn't stop talking. I tried to explain what had happened, but the words came out jumbled. One of the officers stayed with me while the others went inside my apartment. The wait felt endless. When they came back out, their expressions told me everything. They had found him. He was hiding in my bedroom closet, crouched behind my clothes, pressed into the corner like he had tried to make himself invisible. He hadn't taken anything. He hadn't broken anything. He had just been waiting. The officers told me he had entered my apartment earlier that evening through a window I had left unlocked to let in fresh air. Once inside, he locked the door from the inside and hid, waiting for me to come home. One of the officers said that cases like this were more common than people realize. That sometimes intruders don't come to steal. Sometimes they come to wait. I couldn't go back inside that night. I stayed with a friend, but I barely slept. Every sound made my heart race. Every shadow felt like it was moving. I moved out 2 weeks later. Even now, years later, I still check closets first when I enter a room. I still double-check locks. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I catch myself listening for breathing that isn't mine. This happened when I was 12 years old, and even though I was young at the time, I remember it with uncomfortable clarity. My family lived in a 2-story house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was the kind of place where people waved at each other in the mornings and kids rode their bikes in the street without much supervision. My parents trusted the area completely. We never talked about crime. We never talked about break-ins. That sense of safety was part of everyday life. That night, my parents thought my sister and I were asleep. We weren't. My sister and I shared a bedroom at the end of the upstairs hallway. We were supposed to be in bed, but we were whispering to each other in the dark, talking about school and whatever else felt important at 12 years old. The house was quiet except for the faint sound of the television downstairs, while my parents had fallen asleep on the couch. At some point, the TV went quiet. I remember noticing that first, the sudden absence of sound. A few seconds later, we heard glass break. It wasn't loud enough to sound like an explosion. It was more like a sharp crack, followed by the faint tinkling of pieces falling to the floor. My sister stopped talking mid-sentence. We listened. Neither of us moved. At first, I thought maybe something had fallen in the kitchen. A glass knocked off the counter. Something harmless. Then we heard voices. Low. Whispering. They were coming from downstairs. I felt my stomach tighten as the realization set in that someone was inside our house. The voices moved through the first floor slowly. We could hear drawers opening, the soft scrape of wood, the careful footsteps of people trying not to make noise. Whoever they were, they knew what they were doing. My sister and I stayed perfectly still in our beds. I remember staring at the crack under our bedroom door, watching the faint light from downstairs shift as people moved through the house. Every sound felt magnified. Every breath felt too loud. At one point, the footsteps stopped at the bottom of the stairs. I remember thinking that if they came upstairs, there would be nowhere for us to go. The steps creaked as someone started climbing. Slowly, deliberately. Each creak felt like it took forever. I squeezed my eyes shut, holding my breath, waiting for the door handle to move. The shadow of someone's feet appeared under the door. They stopped right outside our room. I could see the outline shift slightly, as if the person was standing there, listening. I don't know how long it lasted. It could have been seconds or minutes. Time didn't feel real in that moment. The door handle never moved. Eventually, the shadow disappeared. The footsteps retreated down the hallway. Later, we heard the back door open and close. Silence followed. Neither of us spoke. We stayed frozen in our beds until we heard my parents yelling downstairs, followed by the sound of them calling the police. The officers arrived quickly. They moved through the house with flashlights, checking every room. The intruders were gone. They had taken electronics, wallets, and my dad's spare car keys. They had also taken the house phone off the hook, which explained why my parents hadn't heard it ring when the alarm company tried to call. One of the officers told us that the intruders likely assumed everyone upstairs was asleep. That was the part that stayed with me. They didn't know we were awake. If they had known, the officers said, things might have gone very differently. My parents installed an alarm system the next week. For a long time after that, I couldn't sleep with my door closed. I needed to hear everything, every sound, every movement in the house. Even now, as an adult, I still think about the shadow under that door and how close someone came to opening it.